running out of tissues yesterday. I know what it's like.
Okay. Can I start or? Okay, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to my session, how to get started with writing tests for contrib. First, thank all of our sponsors, the main sponsors and all the other sponsors. For those who want to follow along, the slides and the example module I'm going to use are going to be online on Bitly. I'm also going to post a link to those at the Drupal camp website. So if you want to check the slides or the module afterwards, you can always check them. So, who am I, you may be asking? I'm Brent. I'm a developer or architect at Drupal. You can find me on Twitter and on Drupal.org under the username Brent Gees. I work at Drupal and we're also giving away a drone at the moment. If you want to participate, you can always go to the website drupalnova.drupal.com. You can share a picture over there, for example of this session, and then you can win a drone. So, as I said, I work at Drupal. This is a large part of the solid, not everyone is there, and I'm over there. So, maybe first a raise of hands. Who here has a contrib module of their own or is a heavy contributor? A couple of them. Who has written a test before? A couple of people. Are there people who have never contributed anything? Yeah, still a couple of them. Well, let's hope that changes after this session. So first, what is testing? Definition is software testing is a process used to identify the correctness, completeness, and quality of developed computer software. It includes a set of activities conducted with the intent of finding errors in software so that could be corrected before the product is released to the end user. That's a pretty long sentence, but in more simple words, software testing is an activity to check that the software is defect-free. So why did I decide to give the session? Actually, I gave the session the first time in Lisbon, so you'll find some reference over there in the module I wrote. But the reason I decided to give a session, because last year in September, the first sprint I participated in DrupalCon Vienna, I only wrote tests. In my opinion, it was the best way to get started with it, because you'll learn a lot of new things. Most people don't write tests for their work, because most bosses think it's too much time and too much cost to write tests. So participating in a sprint and contributing, it gives you time to learn new things, and that's always fun. It's always really helpful, because most of the times tests, most people don't like to write them. So when you try to help, they always be glad with your help. Even if it's like a really small part, they will be happy. There are also enough issues that require tests, so you will never run out of work. Another advantage is you don't have to know the complete module. I helped writing road tests for the facets module. It's a pretty big module, requires a lot of work to get to know the module, but for the test I had to write, I didn't need to know the complete module. Just a small part was enough to get started. So there's a difference with your own modules or contrib modules. When you want to write own modules, there are some advantages. When you are going to help with other modules from other people, there are also some advantages. For own modules, an advantage is that the easy tests are still available. Like the really easy tests that require a smaller effort to set up, they will not be done, so you can write those. A disadvantage, you'll have to set up everything yourself. For other modules, so the advantage there is that they will have a lot of functions already created. For example, to create a field, it will be just a function instead of writing a complete function yourself. A disadvantage is that the easy parts will be gone most likely. So there will be some easy parts, but depending on the module, it's possible that they are no longer available. I would advise that one if you can find a maintainer of a module. If you can't find a maintainer, you can always go to the Drupal.org issue page. search on the issue tag needs test and figure one out. If you have figured one out, try to contact the maintainer or a co-maintainer or a heavy contributor. Send them a message like, hey, I want to help with this module, want to write some tests on this issue. Can you help me a little bit? And I'm pretty sure they will be gladly to help you out to write your test. There are a lot of tests available. At the moment there are around 2,000 issues tagged with needs test in Drupal core and around 4,000 overall for all modules, so there's plenty of work. Why you should write tests, when you have your, I don't know if anyone had a similar problem. You fix something on page A, a week later it seems page B is broken, but the pages do not relate to each other, but for some reason they break. It can take weeks until you find out. If you have written a test, you'll find out immediately and you can fix it straight away without waiting a month or a week or 2 weeks before the client sees it and sends you a message, hey, this page is broken. When you're writing for contrib, you also have a responsibility. When you have your own module or your own patch and it's used by a lot of people, for example, you wrote a big function for a module that's used by 5,000 people, there's an update of the module, 2 weeks later, issue reports start getting in, like, hey, this page, it doesn't work anymore, like, do you know what's happening? Then you start to figure out, and it turns out something was wrong with your patch or with the update. You'll have to fix it. If there was a test, you would have known it in advance. If not, you know it 2 weeks or even later, and 50 or more sites will have the issue that you caused. There are some types of tests. I'm going to cover a small part of them. There are many more tests, but for this session I'm going to cover the most basic. You have manual testing and you have automated testing. In automated testing I'm going to cover the unit testing, kernel testing and functional testing. There are a lot more of them, but those are the most easy ones. Manual testing. I hope everyone here has done a manual test. It's something that can be done by a developer, a dedicated tester, by the client or a project manager. It's the most primitive of all testing types. You just go to the website, check if it works, and yeah, if it works, it's okay. If it doesn't work, you submit a bug. It's most of the times used for short-term projects, like a project that has to be done within the month, and after the month it's not going to be proceeded, then a manual test is more than enough. A disadvantage is that you can forget the use cases pretty easy, but it doesn't require a lot of time. You don't have to write any line of code. You can just go to the website, try some steps, and it's done. Like in 5 minutes you're done. But if you have the product for 1 year and you have to test it every week, it can get pretty boring after a while. It can be done just in the browser, like most manual tests, but actually it can also be done with Exibug, Vardump, DSM, DPM, or Kint, or just by reading code. For example, a colleague wrote a function. You read over the function, like, okay, what should it do and what does it? That's also some form of testing. Another form is just on the Drupal.org, needs review. There are a lot of issues that needs review. I think it's over 3,000 issues. Most issues stuck on that status. So if you can help on that, everyone will be very glad, because some are there for like years. But then a bit more to the automated testing, because the manual testing can get pretty boring. So unit testing. With unit testing, you test on several functions, methods, or classes. It extends on the unit test case. The advantages of unit testing: you can verify individual parts of your code. You, for example, wrote a function to test something, you test that specific function. So if there's something wrong with that function, you'll immediately know, okay, that's the function that's wrong, you can start to fix it. It's also really fast to execute. I'll show it in a demo later on that it's really fast. and it doesn't require a lot of system setup for the first test run. There are also some disadvantages. When you refactor your code, it might require your test to be rewritten. It also has some complicated mocking, and you have no guarantee that the whole system actually works. Like, it's possible that your function works, but the page that uses the function, it's possible that it just doesn't work. The folder structure of the module I'm going to use, it's still a module from the session in Lisbon, but the demo is correct. Like, it's a pretty simple module. Like, you have the info and .module file. Those are just the most common info and module file possible. Then you have one PHP class, Lisbon, and then you have the test folder. In the test folder, I prefer to split everything up under a folder unit, a folder kernel, and a folder functional, because it's easier to find out in the end. So here it's just a unit test, Lisbon sum test. So the class lisbon.php is just simple class that has one variable, total, a function to get the total, a function to set the total, and a function to add an amount to the total. So a pretty basic function. The test of that, as you can see, the namespace is just Drupal Lisbon. And it uses the unit test case. So the class Lisbon sum test extends from the unit test case. And we have the variable Lisbon. So first, we have a function setup. The setup function is run every time you start a test. So as soon as you execute a test, this is the first thing that will happen. So in here, we'll create a new variable Lisbon, and that will put the class Lisbon we created earlier. Another function that is executed every time is a tear down function. That one gets executed as soon as the test is finished. So in this one, we're going to remove the variable that we created here, so that the test is just clean. In here, it's not really needed, but it's cleaner that way. Then the test itself, because we have the setup, the tear down, but now we need the test itself. Here we're just going to test to set a total. So in the beginning we use assert equals. With assert equals you compare the left value and the right value, and those should be the same. If it's not the same, it will throw an error. If it's the same, the test will succeed. So in the beginning it should be 0. So we assert equals 0, and then we get the total from the class Lisbon. After that we're going to set the total to 366. And then we're going to check if it's set correctly. We also have another test just to get the total. There we're going to set total to 366. Then we're going to use assert not equals. So assert not equals, pretty obvious. Same as assert equals, but just not equal. And then we're going to add something to the total. So we're going to set it to 200. We're going to add 166, and then it should be 366. So for the first time, how do we set it up? You can just download the Drupal from drupal.org. You can use git clone. My preference is to use Composer because it set it up directly, and when you use preferred source, it will download the git code. So if you're going to create a patch, and you have done your changes, you can just use git diff to create your patch immediately. When you want to work not on Drupal core but on a contrib module, you just use composer require Drupal and then the module you want to use. The same you can also use prefer source, because it's the easiest to, because it will download the git, so you can create your patch immediately. Then you're going in the web core folder, and there you're going to copy the phpunit.xml dist to phpunit.xml. After that is done, you go to the root of your website and you execute the module. With this you're going to test the complete folder. If you want to test one specific test, you can add -- filter and a test name. But enough to show, now I'm going to show it. So, As you can see, I copied the phpunit.xml to phpunit.xml, to phpunit.xml. I haven't changed anything here. So this is just a regular one. Then I'm going to try to execute my the command that is standing here. So does that vendor bin phpunit modules custom Lisbon test src unit, and you'll see it will fail here. The reason it failed is because it doesn't found the unit test case. So it looks like it's not working yet. What did we do wrong here? In this phpunit.xml, there's a part here that defines the types of tests where you can find them. You don't have to really know this, but how do you fix this so that it works? Oh, sorry. There are two solutions to fix this. Now we're in the web folder. One solution to fix this is we start from the core folder, because in here you'll find the phpunit.xml and he'll find there the information that he needs. Another solution is to use the same function as here, but we use -c core to define the path where the phpunit.xml file is. So if I execute this, the test should run okay. Like, it took 247 milliseconds, so pretty fast. There are 3 tests, and for assertions, they work, so it's okay. I'm just going to the test. I'm just going to change something to show what happens when the test is wrong. So for example, if I expect 365 here, and I execute it again, there's one failure, and he says, failed asserting that 366 matches expected 365. So you know there's something with test at total at line 57, so you can check what is wrong, fix it, and then try your test again, and it will hopefully succeed. So the second part of testing is kernel testing. Kernel testing are integration tests that test on components. An advantage is you can install modules with it. It's actually a minimal Drupal site. You have full API access, you have the database, but you don't have HTTP access, so you can't go to the site itself. Most of the time it extends from the kernel test base or the entity kernel test base. The advantages of kernel testing, you can verify that components actually work together because it uses a database, so you can check more than unit testing if it works together. It's a little bit easy to locate bugs. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard, but most of the times it's doable. Disadvantage, it has a slower execution time than unit testing, and it has some system setup required. There's also no guarantee that the end user features actually work. It's still possible that the page won't work, but chances are smaller than with a unit test. The folder structure of the demo module, most part is still similar as the unit tests, but there are some files added. I added a config install file because I'm going to create a config form and going to test if it works. So in here I'm going to set the default value, the schema just to define the config form, then of course the form itself. And with the test, now I have in the folder kernel another file just for the test. So the config form, it's just a pretty basic config form with a build, submit, like you would make every config form, so I'm not going to go into detail on that one. The settings.yaml, that sets the default value, schema.yaml to define it, and then the test itself. So as I said, it extends from the kernel test base. I'm going to set a user in here, and here I'm going to define what modules are used. The system module, the user module, and the module Lisbon. So in here I still have a setup. So I'm always going to call the parent. Then I'm going to install the config of Lisbon. This will install the default form that I set in here, otherwise it won't work. Then I'm going to test itself. So I'm first going to get the config Lisbon settings, then I'm going to get the name, so the name that is set here. I'm going to check if it's equal to, so assert equals dev days is awesome. Drupal camp is really awesome as well, so no feelings. Then a second test to change it. So I'm first going to get it again. This part is equal to this one, but I'm going to extend it, get the editable, set it to Lisbon is awesome, again is awesome as well, save it, and then check if it has changed. To set it up, it requires a little bit more work. I'm going to show it all afterwards as well. So, like in the first, with the unit test, get the project, get clone, download it, or use Composer, get the module, go to the web core folder, copy it from phpunit.xml.des to phpunit.xml, and then you have to change one file. There is simple test.db. You'll have to fill in your test.db here. So for me, the user and password is just root. Very secure, I know. It's on my local host, and the database I'm using is Lisbon testing. You'll have to set it up because the kernel test is using the database. Then, when it has been set up, the same as with a unit test, that's it. I'm going to show it in action. I'm not going to change the phpunit.xml, so you'll see what error message you get. Then I'm going to change it so that you see how it works. So instead of the unit, I'm now going to execute the kernel. It will get an error message. There is no database connection, so no tests can be run. You must provide a simple test DB environment. So it says the database is not working, so you go to the phpunit.xml file. In here, you have the simple test DB. I'm going to uncomment it, so root and then the database. Going to execute it as well. Wait a little bit and the test succeeds. As you can see, it took 1.9 seconds. The unit test took 243 milliseconds. So that's already a big difference. It's only 2 tests, so the difference is still pretty small. But if you're executing like 30 or 50 tests, it can take a little bit longer. Same here, if I change something of the test, so here, just add something random. I did save it. I'm still, oh, okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm still running the unit test. Okay, so it expects this, but it received this, so then I'm going to fix it again. So that runs. Always fun to see the green lights, not the red lights. So the last form of testing is functional testing. There are 2 big types, browser test-based and JavaScript test-based. There are a lot more, but those are the most common ones and the most easiest to get started with. I'm going to show the browser test-based. I'm not going to go into the JavaScript test-based, but you can always find a lot of information about it if you want to get started with that. Advantages of functional testing. You can verify the complete system as experienced by the end user. And you can verify if a system works even if it has been refactored. For example, with the config form, what we're going to test is we're going to go to the config form in the browser, fill in the changes, save it and check if it has changed. If you change some code in the backend, this should still work. The user should still be able to visit the page. He should not see any changes. There are also some disadvantages. It has a very slow execution time. If you run a lot of functional tests, it will take a while before they are executed. It requires a more heavy system setup. It's still doable. I'm going to show how to set it up, but it's a little bit more work. It can be hard to locate the origin of bugs, because with the functional test, with the unit test, it shows you the function that's going wrong. Functional test, it's just the page is wrong, can be any function on the page. It's also a little bit prone to random test fails. I had the problem in Vienna that I wrote a test, executed on the Drupal.org, waited, it failed, was looking for half an hour, asked someone else, can you help? We didn't find it, we just retested it, and then it just worked. So if it fails and you have no ID, execute it again. If it fails again, then you're probably the problem. If it works, then yeah, you just had some bad luck. So the folder structure for the biggest part is still the same. We added a routing.yaml file now to access the page, because we need to access the config form for the browser test base. And in the functional, we have two tests. The test we're going to use is the Lisbon config form test, but we also have the load test. That's one that's created by Composer. If you install a module with Drupal console, you can set those tests. So that's a pretty easy test for the first time. So if you're setting up tests, creating module with Drupal console, and you ask, are you going to write tests? Just put yes, and you'll have your first test without any work. So the routing, I just set a path to admin/Lisbon. I have the form, title, permissions, admin route, the default form. So the form is still the same. The test, so in here I'm going to use the module Lisbon. I'm not using the same modules as in the previous one, the system and the user. That's because with the functional test, those are already installed. Because it's a more complete Drupal installation, you don't have to install those. In the setup, I'm going to call the parent again, and after that I'm going to create a user that can administer the site configuration, because I need a user with that permission, because otherwise he won't be able to access the page. Then I'm going to log in that user, and after that's done, I'm going to execute the test itself. So I first define the path to the module, then I set the things that has to be changed. So in the form, the element with the name edit Lisbon name, I'm going to show you later on how you can find that name. We're going to change it to Lisbon is awesome. Now we're going to post a form. So we're going to post it that it changes that value. Then we go to the page again. We first assert a response to 100. That's just to check if the page is loading. If it's not like page not found or just a random error. Then we're going to check the config and check if the config has changed to the value we have set over here. So to set it up for the first time, still the same as the previous time. Composer create project, use prefer source, download the module you need, go to the core folder, copy the phpunit.xml, set up the simple database like in the kernel test, and what gets added here is the base URL. So you'll have to be able to access the page, the website from your local URL. For me it's just lisbontesting.local, but it should work with any URL if you have it available on your local machine. Then to test again, exactly the same as the previous time. So I'm going to show it as well. So first, without changing anything in the phpunit.xml, we'll get error, simple test base URL is not set up. So we're going to the phpunit.xml, set it up here, and we're going to execute it here, and then we'll wait. I said it was slower than kernel and unit. This is a proof, so This is always the most interesting part of the presentation. And it's done. 18.63 seconds for 2 tests. So imagine if you have like 30 or 40 tests, it can take a couple of minutes, or if you have even more, maybe an hour or longer. So try to use unit if possible. Try to include some functional. Depends on how many time you have to execute the tests. But the most fun part of functional testing is actually the debugging, in my opinion. I told you how I'm finding this name. That's with debugging. You can add a printer to it. --printer Drupal test listener HTML output printer, and then it will print out every window it gets. So first it's going to show an error as well. I'm going to let it execute. The error here is because you have to set up a browser test output directory. You have to set up a folder where you can store those images. So in here I have just the site's default files of my project. So the test succeeded, but it didn't put out anything. I'm going to execute it as well. Now we have changed this so that it can set up the files. So we wait a little bit again. And what it's doing now, it's actually executing all those steps, and every window that pops up, it's going to create an HTML page. So this is a test we executed. So first we went to the login page, so user login. Then we logged in, so this is the header that you get when you log in. Then he redirects to the user page, goes to the config form, so admin/Lisbon. And in here we have to find how to set up this one. So how we can do it? Just by inspect element. So if we go to this input form, you'll have the, let me check where it was, the data Drupal selector, edit Lisbon name. And this should be the same as the one I'm using here, edit Lisbon name. So that's how you can find the name that you have to use to set up the form. So, and after this, it just submits the form. So the configuration options have been saved. So you see, in the first it was Drupal camp is awesome, and now it has changed to Gent is awesome, and then not found, because that was the last part of the test. In my opinion, that's the most fun part about writing functional tests, just seeing all those steps. There are also other types of tests where you can really see a browser popping up. It will do all the steps. You can just see it all executing, but those are a little bit more advanced steps. So you can look in those if you are interested. But for now, we're just going to stick to this. So to summarize a bit, if you want to test functions, try to use unit tests. If you want to test module APIs without HTTP access, but with a database, try to use kernel tests. And if you want to test complete web interfaces, use functional tests. Like you saw, functional tests are pretty slow. They are fun. They test really good, but try to minimize those, because having a lot of those will take quite a while to execute. I'm going to show you some tips and tricks. Try to start small. Just take first the easiest task. Get used to testing. When you're used to testing, start with going more difficult tasks when you are more familiar with the code for testing. Learn from others. An advantage of those easy tasks is that it has been done probably. Like testing the config form, there are tons of modules that have a config form, that test the config form, so don't try to write it yourself. look at another module that you know has a config form, look into the code, copy a bit, change a bit, and it will help you a lot. Try to find a maintainer. There are a lot of maintainers walking around here, so you're pretty sure you'll be able to find someone who can help you. If you don't have a maintainer, if you can't find a maintainer here, try to contact him on Slack. Most people are on Slack or on Drupal chat. Ask them, hey, I want to help on your module, I want to write some tests. Do you maybe have some starter tests that has to be written? He'll probably guide you to an issue. He'll help you set it up, and you'll be started in no time. If you're using your own module, try to create a roadmap. On your project page or just with some notes, try to set up the future steps of your modules and add a segment of tests. For example, now you have the idea, oh, I want to write a test to test the config form, but you don't have time now, and in a month you have forgotten it. Just write it down and you have a list of tests that need to be done. You can define for yourself which are the most important ones when you start working on your module, and if it's less important you can just put it on a list for if you have enough time. Try to use Drupal console. As I said earlier, when you create a module with Drupal console, it also asks if you want to create a test. It's a very functional test that just checks if the user login page is working, or no, it's to check if the front page is still working. It's an easy test, but it has some code, so you can look into the code to check what you can use. So this is the module that it creates. So just a setup and a test load of the front page. So very easy, but it has the assert session, status code equals. It has a setup, uses a browser test base, uses static modules, so you can, yeah, it has all the base that you'll need. This was a session. If you have feedback, be sure to let us know and join in. It's a QR code to the link. It's only my second time I gave a session, so all feedback is welcome. I don't know if there are any questions.
I've just checked it if you have a large testing to do, like functional testing and kernel testing, you can speed it up by disabling executable commands. It will save you about you will end up with 1/3 of the time.
Yeah. So he gave a valuable tip, like if you're using a functional test and you're using Xdebug, try to disable it. It will increase the speed a lot. If possible, also try to execute the functional tests on a separate machine, for example, a separate environment that you build and try to run the tests. And when you're working on local, just test the test you're working on. But disabling the Xdebug is a really helpful tip that will save a lot of time. Yeah, someone in the back?
I find it really difficult to determine which test to write. So not which kind of test, but like what to test in the module. Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, so the question was if I have any tips on what tests to write. It's difficult to define, indeed. If it's for contrib, it's most of the time just checking what are the most important parts of it. If it's for the client, then you have to define with the client, like, what are for you the most valuable parts of the website. Like, for example, if it's a commerce site, it doesn't really add a lot of value to test the blog site. It adds more value to test, for example, the add to cart functionality. But it depends on the project. So you have to kind of figure out with the client or for the module you're writing, like, this is important for the module, so I want this to be written. Like, that's how I try to decide it. I don't know if that's an answer to your question. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't see.
Do you have any tips on how to enjoy writing tests?
Yeah, for me, just using the browser test base is actually enjoyable because I learn a lot while writing tests. Yeah, for some people, it just isn't what you like to do. Some people more like to write something else. For me, it's fun because I see all those things. Try to learn a couple of new things. For example, maybe try with Behat or try with another browser test base. Try some new things so you learn a little bit more. That maybe helps with enjoying it more. Someone else?
Yeah, I just an answer to the question when to write or what to write tests.
Yeah.
If you encounter a bug, it's a good time to start writing a test for that, so you don't encounter the bug again later. So
Yeah, indeed.
it doesn't work, and then you have to make it work.
Yeah, indeed, a good answer for how to find what test you have to write. Just when you receive a bug from something, don't fix the bug, but fix the bug and write a test for it. That's a good use case. Someone else who has questions? Yeah.
Would you recommend to write a test before the actual feature?
Well, if you try to work test-driven, it's best to write a test in advance. It's the better use case, but most people try to postpone it until the end. It is the better option, but I think it's done 1% of the time maybe. But I would say try it before, try it after, and try what you like best. If there are other questions, I'll be at the booth of DropSolid. Just come to me and ask some questions. If I'm not at the DropSolid booth, I'm probably in the Sprint room or container, so you can find me over there.